Hello, everyone. This is Ismail Haznedar. Greetings from Gain Global Platform. Today, we are hosting our webinar session, and I have a great speaker and a friend from Romania, Ionut Tata, as an entrepreneur consultant as well as civic leader. He will be sharing his experience about rethinking the future and also about strategic foresight. We will be talking about innovation. Ionut, welcome to our session.
Hello, Ismail. Good to be here.
Thank you for accepting my invitation. I'm really glad and pleased to welcome you. I would like to greet our audience as well. Thank you for participating and sharing your time to be a part of this webinar. You will have a chance to share your opinions through the chat room. Meanwhile, we will be glad to hear who you are or from which country you are joining. Please just say hi and put your names and countries there. Also, if you have a question to our speaker, we'll be glad to receive it through Ask a Question button that's on the bottom of the screen. During the session or at the end, I will have a chance to direct it to our speaker. I see Sarah is here. Welcome, Dr. Koch. Hi, welcome to everyone. So, Ionut, let me turn to you and welcome to our session. I will be glad, first of all, to hear about you. Can you make a brief introduction?
Sure, thank you. So my name is Ionut Tata. I'm the CEO of a company called Iceberg. We're based in a Romanian city called Brașov, but we have headquarters and offices in Bucharest as well as in Paris through our partners there. We are quite an old company. We have, I think, 17 years since we are established, but since 10 years now, we've been working and being deeply involved in setting up innovation projects, setting up innovation and entrepreneurship ecosystem in Romania. And we had hands-on involvement in policy making, in digital innovation and digital transformation and technology transfer in Romania and beyond in other member states of the European Union. Together with my team, we are on lockdown these days, but we have been using the time to think about what's changing for us, for our business, for our clients, and for societies around us. And we've been seeing everything around us as both challenges and opportunities, which means that we have to change the way we've been doing and conducting our business. So we started changing already for the future, and we'd like to engage everybody in our community and beyond in a discussion about how they want to change. And I'm here to share some of the thoughts that I have in the past months about how innovation needs to change, what startups need to do different or to expect different, but then again also but what governments, what decision makers, what cities should do in the different ways in order to foster innovation and not isolate. So it's rather about innovation than isolation, what we should do in the upcoming months and years.
It's as you mentioned, it's something that we can overcome all together. Like we are talking always the three sectors of society: government, civil society, and business world. We are addressing different roles and participants from different countries. We have some friends from Romania, Bulgaria, from Monaco, from Turkey, from India. And I'm really glad to have this diversity so we can hear also their contributions. As you mentioned, this period is a specific period. Before we enter to the topic, you have a presentation. I'm looking forward to hear your recommendations there. You mentioned that it's also a good opportunity to rethink and maybe redesign. And you said that you are working on that. And how you feel with current period and with the near future? I will be glad to hear.
Well, we feel quite confident about what's coming. To some extent, the times that are ahead of us are or require the kind of approach that we've been having for years, because we've been more, not conservative, but we've been more risk aware in conducting our business and working for our clients. It has been some part of our approach together with the drive for innovation, but some of the things that were going on in the economy, I think, were detached from reality. Some of the way markets evolved in recent years showed that there has been nothing learned from the 2008 crisis. But then again, some of the measures that we see around us are echoes of the measures that seemed to have worked after 2008. But then again, this is a different crisis. And it's not a financial crisis, it's rather a supply and demand or a value chain crisis, and we need to approach it differently, which means we need to be more. Yes?
It's not something that we overcome with the learnings that we have from the past, correct? Therefore, we taught to think about rethinking, to change our mentality.
It really depends on what we have done in the past, what kind of what we have learned, and to some extent the approach that brought you and myself together in JCI is an approach that helps, because it's an approach where you look at your community and you see what the needs of the community are, and you start with innovation and you start with the change by improving the community around you. Then you also think about what another community or at some other end of the world needs, because today the impact of the virus is stronger in New York than it is in Brasov, Bucharest, or Istanbul. And we might consider how we can help the people of New York with this. And if we can help, we will help. And on the long term, this can turn into business and results for us. But now we see how the world can either become smaller and we can come together, or how there can be more walls set up so that we don't cross the boundaries. But look, the internet brings us together, and we're doing all these conf calls every day with people from around the globe, and half of these conf calls and webinars are about the virus and the solutions to the virus, which is good, which is a good exercise. It's good that we have this crisis or world war, or however you want to call it, and that the enemy is not human in this case. It's not a minority or another nation, but it's something which is not human. So we can ally against it, and then also change our behavior and be united after this is over, and use the approach that we have learned in these months or years to put it to business for us.
And also there are some other common challenges that we may overcome with that united spirit, because we were talking about climate change, poverty, a lot of common things that global goals was focusing, as you know, for 2030, but we didn't have maybe common approach there. Now maybe we are learning to act together during this period.
Yes, yeah, it's also about, in the past years, it has become for too many people too much about money or about financial results again. While as today, you can have all the money in the world, but there is no vaccine. And at the same time, if you look across the street or across the city where you live, there are some young people who sit isolated in their apartments where they pay rent, and they're out of jobs because they were working in restaurants and the restaurants are now closed, and they are frustrated and they have fears about lack of food or supplies 1 month from now. So how much money we might have, or how big a business we might have, if our community is unbalanced, we have nothing. So basically, this is a time where we need to look into our communities and the communities we are engaged with, and see who is in need and how we can solve these needs. So it's not just about fighting the virus, because you cannot have 7 billion people fighting the virus. That's something for researchers, scientists, and doctors in that field. But then there's so many other challenges that need to be solved and that we can solve. And getting involved in this ourselves as people, as businesses, or as government will change the way that we will conduct business, government, and we will interact in society in the future.
Ionut, can you also brief what is the focus of Iceberg? Like what you're doing there?
Sure. We work a lot with European Commission and the financial resources that they distribute to the member states and to startups, SMEs, and companies throughout Europe. But besides this, we take also a stand on promoting innovation and new technologies in Romania and in the neighboring countries. And we also we provide technical assistance or strategic assistance to government and local authorities in this part of Europe. We've been involved with setting up business incubators. We have a portfolio of 4 projects, among them the biggest business incubator in Romania that was just launched. And I think we actually need to rethink it because it was meant for some industries, but now we will need to support other industries because everything is changing. We do technology transfer, so this means we work with companies that want to embrace novel technologies and don't know how to use them or don't know how to adapt them to their processes and to their market. So we help them. We do soft landing for technology with them. And besides this, we have also established innovation and technology cluster, which has turned into something that the European Commission has coined Digital Innovation Hub, which means we are a platform which supports various industrial sectors or economic sectors in their digital transformation and in adopting new technologies and innovation in their business models.
Okay, thank you for that briefing. We are looking forward for your presentation. So we will be talking about rethinking innovation and strategic foresight.
Yes.
I'll focus to your presentation. It's already open.
Thank you. So I'm just going to do a briefing on some of our thoughts, and I'm open to any kind of debate or questions, and I'll gladly listen or read to what our attendance is thinking about. Looking at the current crisis, we have to go back to the basic of the value chains and see where we are on the map. And here you see.
Meanwhile, it's not a full screen. If you wish to turn to a full screen.
Oh yes, sorry.
Yeah.
Thank you for that. So here you see how the World Trade Organization has mapped out the main global value chains as of 2018, and I highlighted Turkey and Romania just because we are in this discussion together now, just so we see where we stand on these value chains, because to some extent, the main majority of countries are connected, and some of them are at the very end of these value chains. And once the main market, like Germany, stops producing cars, that means that all the parts suppliers along the value chain, be they from Turkey, be they from Romania or Czech Republic, they don't have a client anymore. That means they send people back home. They maybe don't pay them full salary or not at all for a couple of months, or they have to decrease on employment. So basically, there's a domino effect that's happening. So obviously, we can expect to have unemployment in these kind of places, and it's no matter the measures that we take. And I've seen government try to launch guarantee schemes for loans to companies, subsidies for salaries or for technical unemployment and all that. But it's not about that. It's about supply and demand. Once there will be no demand for cars anymore, because people will be conservative in their buying behavior, there will be no demand for parts that we are producing in our countries. That will mean unemployment in these sectors. And there is a structural problem with the sectors in some of these markets or some of these countries, especially Romania, also Turkey, I think. And this is something that you will like, the smile graph. It's a concept from a guy called Stan Stech. And it talks about the added value along the value chain. And you see that when you do research and development, you have a high added value. But when you do manufacturing, as some of these countries are doing, Romania is doing that, Bulgaria is doing that, Hungary is doing that.
We
Turkey
are
is doing
also manufacturing oriented, yeah, in
Exactly,
Turkey.
exactly. Then you have low added value, but then also you have an average, medium commoditization of what you do, which means you can, on average, be easily replaced. Because at one point, big country like Germany, when markets shrink, they will try to keep manufacturing in their own country. At the same time as automation, for example, industrial robots decrease in prices, become more affordable, it will be easier to keep manufacturing in the home countries of these companies, which means that they will not have to outplace them to countries with lower wages like they did before, which was a competitive advantage for us because we had lower wages, so we could do manufacturing. So obviously, what we need to do is to try to use the available resource or the resource that will become available and reposition ourselves on this kind of a smile graph, which means we either have to teach people to design, branding, R&D, or we have to move toward distribution, marketing, and sales. Obviously, once you go towards distribution, marketing, and sales, you are easier to be commoditized, which means to be replaced. So I think the obvious direction to go once this crisis really will kick in strongly and we will start feeling unemployment is to try to do reskilling and bring people towards more creative work, towards developing products, developing services, research and development at its most ambitious state. Now, there's been lots of...
Meanwhile, in that screen, where you see the startups, you mean the startups can be part of any of this commodity chain, or can we focus them on a specific part?
Today, they are obviously in every place along the commodity chain, because there are deep tech startups, which obviously are in the R&D part, but then there's lots of startups which just do redesign of business models, or they use new technology like mobile apps to make something easier. It might be that they are focused on distribution. It might be that they have a novel CRM, which means they would be somewhere between sales and marketing. But if it's not deep tech, I would say it's not in R&D. It's not on the left upper side, but it would be, and most of the startups I've seen, and at least in Eastern Europe, are on the right side of the graph. So they're related to distribution, to marketing, to sales, to e-commerce, to these kind of things. But this side actually depends on the center and the left side, because you have to have something to sell, something to distribute. Once the market will crunch down and it will become smaller and smaller because of this domino effect, this downward spiral, there will be less things to sell, less things to market, less things to distribute. So there will be a big impact there. So what needs to be done is to start from the left side. There is obviously a need for government support, in my opinion, to keep supply and demand floating, which means to encourage consumption and investment. And investment will come as a follow-up to R&D. So on one hand, we need to have resources in R&D. And I think there needs to be a strategic reshift of what we research and develop these days as compared to before. And we will talk about that a bit later.
Okay.
But then again, I think startups have to shift as well towards the left side. So they have to do more research, go a bit deeper in what they do. And we will get back to that because we already have some tendencies that we've noticed in the past quarter on this.
Okay.
I would like to go further, just a short overview of maybe the most popular analysis that has been done about the future of the state, because it's really important to look at how the states react, because the budgets they are putting on the table to fight the coronavirus are disruptive, either in a good or in a bad way these days. And the way they react changes a lot of things in markets, because until recently we have considered that you needed to work in order to get paid. But suddenly, in many countries, Denmark, UK, even Romania, the state pays you to stay at home. So there's some kind of a reverse paradigm here, which looks like a state socialism kind of a reaction, or is anyway somewhere in this area of state socialism, mutual aid. And I refer to mutual aid when talking about people who are unemployed in the communities where we live in. But then again, there are other countries, and we've also seen this side as a reaction of where state capitalism is happening, where exchange value is still at the forefront. And we actually seen that there's states which are looking to nationalize companies these days, so that they can impose the way businesses, like transportation businesses or healthcare businesses, work. And then depending on how they will look at those businesses after they are nationalized, it will be either this kind of state capitalism, because if they will run them like businesses and they will not run them like public services, we will have like an exacerbation of the state capitalism. Mm-hmm. So in my opinion, these are the four directions, the four tendencies.
So we can see different countries in different side of this map, correct? Nowadays, there is no unique action then.
Yeah, I would say that has to be balanced. You have to be balanced out between responses. We see maybe reactions in the United States going out of a reflex more towards state capitalism. We see the states in Germany and France maybe going a bit more towards state socialism, and we've seen the Germans say that they will have to cut down on the austerity that they were planning for, which means they will put a lot of money on the market. France said the same, and this is actually good news for us down the value chain, because once there will be money in these markets, there will be consumption, and consumption will mean that we will be producing our part of it and export.
The continuity will be there.
Yeah, so actually, to some extent, our countries don't have to do that much, because the big consumer markets that we supply to are doing their share, which is a paradox. But then again, I don't think it's going to be enough. So that shouldn't be an excuse for our governments to do less. Maybe to go further, and now going a bit towards innovation. And this is one of my favorite sources to look at what innovation seems to be in the upcoming years, and it's the research that Gartner is doing. They are publishing this curve, which is called the Gartner hype curve. Basically, what's happening here, you have an innovation trigger, which is either research or some crazy idea, and then you have this peak of inflated expectations, and at that point, you expect that technology to change the world. And some years ago, you see here in 2015, because I was trying to show how these things evolved. So somewhere in 2015, we had consumer 3D printing, which had just disappointed us all. So everybody was expecting 3D printing to become affordable. Everybody would have a 3D printer in his home. It didn't happen. But today, actually 3D printing is catching on, because 3D printing is essential to printing masks these days, or parts for the respirators.
That's true.
So suddenly there is a use for that. Also, once the supply chains are broken these days because of logistics and everything, we need to manufacture some things locally. So a 3D printer seems to be a good alternative. So suddenly it has become, it will pop up here on the plateau of productivity. And we are now at the slope of enlightenment, where we realize why we had invented the 3D printing all along. Similar things are happening with augmented reality or virtual reality, because we're living in our homes these days, isolated, and maybe we want to travel. And VR is a way to travel and to enjoy.
To enjoy the places. Yeah.
To enjoy not an out of body but an out of home experience this time. But then again, the innovation triggers have always been related to market trends, to supply and demand, to previous technologies existing, and so on and so forth. Suddenly, now, 2020, we have a different kind of trigger. We have a crisis, and the crisis produces lots of changes. The crisis is a health crisis. It has become a social crisis, and to some extent, in some countries, it's an administrative crisis because the state cannot handle the situation.
So it has different perspectives then. You mentioned about the social side, health side, administrative side, and economic side.
So yes, and obviously all this causes an economic challenge. So we have new innovation triggers, which means that for 2020, we will have a completely new technologies popping up. We will have some of these technologies here, which have been highlighted with yellow 5 to 10 years to market, that we will forget about them because they will not be that important anymore. The car of the world will get off the highway and go on a completely different road. So we need to prepare for that different road. We will keep some of the things here, like maybe the nanoscale 3D printing, or the light cargo delivery drones, or various things related to AI, edge AI, explainable AI, and so on, because these things will accelerate, but we will drop other things which might not be central to what we do. But looking at these graphs, we see how innovation, and usually it happens either through startups and their disruptions, or it happens through research in research institutes. So here we see how it evolved in the past 5 years, and we can also think about how it will evolve and change from now on. Obviously, a lot of innovation will go into health, and it's really interesting because I have found this animation here. And when you look at it, you see that basically it's something we recognize from the discussions in the past months. It's people meeting and infecting each other with the virus. But if we would cancel what we see here and what we know from the past months, it would actually be people meeting and infecting each other with ideas. And it's what's called idea fertilization. So it's innovation being distributed in society. But now it cannot happen because people will not meet anymore like this. They will meet like we do now online, but it's not to the full extent the same thing. But then again, we need this in order for innovation to thrive. So obviously, in order to do this, we will need some infrastructure technologies like Zoom is, or like all the other conf calling and webinar technologies are. But it's not going to be enough. I've seen a miraculous thing. We live in a country here in Romania which is inspired in its bureaucracy by both France and Russia. So we have the traditional French bureaucracy with some post-communist flavor. But out of the blue, we've managed to scale up the digital signature within 1 month. So within 1 month of isolation, we've completely eradicated the need for a person to physically sign a document, which has been a tradition. It was like sacred tradition. So it's gone. So to some extent, we see these miracles happening. We see old paradigms being buried, and we see new paradigms popping up. Now, obviously, innovation is not happening in the same way throughout the world because there's different factors. There is the national culture of various people and how they approach innovation. There is the level of education. There is even the age distribution in a country might influence the appetite for innovation or for less innovation. And it was interesting to see in this graph on the left side, which was published by Startup Blink, and they keep an ongoing analysis of this on this interactive map, and you see that most of the innovations happening are actually happening either in San Francisco or in Boston and New York. And you have like an epicenter here, the red one, because it unites Boston and New York. They're quite close one to the other. And that's where most of the innovation responding to the coronavirus is happening. We see obviously Europe also hanging in there, but we then see that Asia, Africa, South America, they really lag on innovation. So they don't
I think
have.
you just have the China there, is it? Or
Yeah, China has a 21.
21, yeah.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
which is not much compared to any place in Europe,
So
actually.
mainly it comes from United States and Europe. Then in such case,
Yeah, it's about the capacity of local innovators, mostly startups, to respond and to come up fast with the product, validate it, and put it to work. To some extent, it has to do even with how the state regulates things, because in Romania we have lots of startups trying to do things that fight the coronavirus, but then the state over-regulates them, so they won't be able to get to market in a relevant time.
I see.
We have dozens of that, but in the United States it's easy to do. So we see how society and the state, the structure of the state is supporting of this. So on one hand, on the left side, we see now that we have lots of innovation focused on or against the coronavirus. But then on the right side, I've put in contrast with this an interesting analysis I found with the guys at Dark Matter Labs, and they talk about the areas of, they call it slow innovation to some extent, but basically the areas where innovation has to focus in 2020. And I will make it bigger.
It's more like a foresight than in such a case,
yeah,
correct?
Yeah, it's a foresight, and I think it's about the because they published this in February, so they were not fully aware maybe of what was going on. But if we look at it, we realize that it's things that we actually feel these days as challenges. It's about caring neighborhoods, because we sit at home these days and we live more in our neighborhoods, so we want them to be better, to improve. Then it's about biological conditions, which include tools for indoor air quality, or various other tools to reduce infections. It's about health and well-being at work. For example, with work from home systems or a different valuation system. It's about collective relational welfare, and we have huge challenges in that as individuals and as communities, because you've noticed how suddenly a normal 8-hour working day is turning into a 12-hour working day, because we tend to over communicate verbally because we cannot communicate visually and interact physically. So there's a change in behavior. So we need to focus on that. Obviously, we need to focus on adult learning, because there's new things to be learned. There's unemployment coming up, and those people will have to be skilled. And all these will need innovation in policy and regulation. And since the people in the public administration also work from home, they will have to rethink the way they do procurement, accounting, and finance, because a fiscal inspector will have to fiscally inspect you from home. He will not be able to come and visit you anymore, like is happening in some countries. So we will need new systems. For example, blockchain-based.
This means new control mechanisms like blockchain. Yes.
Yeah, exactly. And this takes us back, because these people will have to learn about these things. So it takes us back to adult learning. And this will take us back to well-being at work, because we will have to have a different kind of work balance environment, that it gives us time to learn, time to work, and time to live as well. And then this all will take us back to looking at technology that exists and that's being developed, and think about how we use it. Because these days, it will not be that sexy anymore to replace a human with a robot, because on one hand, society will not accept that easily. Then again, we will have unemployment, so it will not be that difficult to employ people anymore. So it will not be that relevant to employ robots instead of people anymore. But it will be relevant to automate procedures, so that we have we give people more time to learn, develop, and technology will become again an infrastructure instead of almost an equal to the human. I think.
So these are now like main expectations in near future, especially in 2020,
Yes.
to be solved. It's usually we say that startup either solves a problem or moves through a need. So this is very interesting page that we have to think and work. Meanwhile, I would like to remind to our participants that they may ask questions to you through ask a question button on the screen. Just during the session or at the end of the session, I may direct these questions to your site.
Yeah, and you can read more about what these guys are planning on their blog, which is Dark Matter Labs, and they have a lot of foresighting, which is really interesting. Now, going a bit towards one of the main sources or vehicles of innovation, which are the startups. The startups have been riding a wave of massive investment. These two graphs show us how much money and how it has grown in the past years, the amount of money that has been put into startups. Basically, half the people were having a startup, even though they were having maybe a corporate job at the same time, or it was part of their corporate job to have a startup. So basically, everybody was having a startup because there was so much money for this out there. And there was lots of startup investment going around, and basically almost everything was getting funded some way or the other, because there was a huge fear of missing out. Investors were afraid of missing out on the next big thing, so they were basically putting a very diverse portfolio out there, hoping and usually succeeding to get back some of the bad investment to the good investment. But what we already see is that there has been a decrease in investment in startups. This is a graph that shows us the decrease in number of venture capital deals, so investment in startups from November, December to January, February. And obviously, maybe it was too early to notice things, but we see that China was massively impacted. So it was up to 67%. We see that the United States were powerfully impacted already. And then we see that Europe was only scarcely impacted by this. I imagine that in the meantime, and I have no update on this, but I imagine that in the meantime, the impact is a bit bigger in
most probably.
Yeah,
because this is just from January, February, you said, especially Europe, the effect is bigger now.
Yes, most likely it is bigger. But most likely it will be a bit different as well than China, because what's happening in China is that the state has been buying out some of the companies, the big players. So the state has put a lot of money into buyouts or bailouts. And they have done something which is not completely bad, which is they have bought the manufacturing companies, they bailed them out. But it is maybe bad, or it is maybe not acceptable to other economies in the way they have done it, because it's if the state comes and buys it, buys the equity, then he will start having control on what you do.
At this point, Ionut, I have a question.
Sure.
In order to survive this period, the issue is the cash flow management, and usually banks, debts, or postponing your payments is one way of doing it. But it does not bring, let's say, sustainability, and therefore to bring the capital or somehow, as you mentioned, the fund of government to buy or acquire, be part of the corporation is or looks a better solution, and we start to see these examples. What's your opinion on that perspective?
Yeah, we've seen this also in Romania. We've seen this in many places. It's the reflex of the state to support banks in providing loans to the companies. And usually they do this by providing state warranties to the banks, and then they let the banks do the work. This happens out of 2 or 3 reasons. One is that the state cannot handle a fast system of distributing money, and they trust the banks in doing this fast. But most of the banks, at least in Europe and in the more capitalist countries, have become quite bureaucratic in the meantime, and they've become quite low risk takers. risk averse, I would say. But then it also happens because the state has the reflex, and he thinks that this is the same crisis we had the last time. But it's not. It's not a financial crisis. It's not a financial market crisis. We don't need money to bail out the banks. We need money to keep people in a demand in a supply demand
moving,
state.
Producing.
So, we need to have people producing something, consuming something, even if it's less. We need to have them put the money in motion, and for that we don't need loans. That's a bad principle, because if we have all these people, we put them in debt for their consumption, it will just postpone the problem, and the problem will pop up later on. So what I think should have been done, instead of putting money through the banks through loans, is to rather have investment funds that buy equity in companies that have potential, and when they buy equity, they also come with management support, with access to markets, with everything that a good VC or a good investment funds supports you with. It actually should be something like more advanced acceleration program, like re-acceleration programs, I would call them. But these kind of programs, these kind of investment funds should have private management, because in that case they would be publicly steered, but because they would have majority of public money, but they would be privately managed to have competent people with private expertise, knowing where to invest and how to support these companies. So this kind of a mechanism has shown positive signs in the past years, because the European Commission has used the mechanism together with the European Investment Fund, and then we have seen it work in Poland from the more Eastern European countries. It almost started to work in Romania in the past years, but we think that this is a good solution, and that this would be a better approach than to put out loans. Actually, we have done a consultation with companies that have been affected by the crisis. We've asked them what they would rather have: a bank loan with warranties, or an investor, even the state as an investor, to buy maybe 30% of the company for 5 years and maintain equity and maintain a bit of control on the company. And they said, I'd rather have them invest so that I can buy back my shares in 5 years from now than have them give me a loan which will have me pay monthly and which would have me maybe go bankrupt if I cannot pay that loan. And I'm feeling still lonely. I don't have a new partner to support me with what I do. I'm just by myself again, but with an extra loan which I didn't have before. So it's also about let's say the mental state you put the entrepreneurs in, and the kind of support that you show them.
There is a relevant question from Sebastian. I would like to direct that one, and he says, how can we in JCI help force or make investors and innovators to take into account the environment in every step of the life of a product or service? So maybe this is a part where NGOs can somehow support that investor and innovation spirit. What are your thoughts about that?
I presume that environment would refer to the natural environment. And obviously in Europe, in the European Union, we have now the Green Deal, which was supposed to be the biggest thing for Europe until the coronavirus came along and stole the show. But the Green Deal is still embedded, and it's still a big part of what's going to happen in Europe 2021, 2027. But obviously Europe is not the only player in a global market where pollution and the environment is affected all over the place. So I think that governments around the world have to become more aware about the environment, have to increase standards, and I think JCI can have a big role in making the state, the government, the decision makers more aware about standards, about raising the bar. But then also we can look towards making the startups more aware about the opportunities that arise from this, because I think the coronavirus shifts the mentalities towards more more consciousness of people. And once you become more aware and conscious about your health, it's really very close to your environment, and you will become more conscious about the environment, about polluting, because you know that pollution actually accelerates even infectious disease once it happens and it is uncontrolled. For example, the coronavirus is easier transmitted through particles of pollution, the really small particles of pollution that are in the air of the polluted cities. So basically, if you would have cleaner air, we would have less risk of infections. So obviously, I mean, it's obvious that we need to do that, and it will become obvious to everyone. And all we need to do with JCI is to collect knowledge and distribute knowledge and create dialogue about this between everybody who's involved. And that's what JCI is sometimes about, dialogue.
I thank you for answering this question and also for your great recommendation. So maybe we turn to your presentation for your final sharings. We have like 10 more minutes, and then we close with your final remarks.
Okay, so I changed the slide now. This is a slide which shows us the total value of VC deals and how it dropped during the two economic crises that have come before us. So we see that there has always been an impact. So we can expect an impact translated in less money for startups and innovators. And we can already see how this is happening, and we'll talk in a minute about it. In the meantime, we've also found interesting statistics about the number of startup employees that have been laid off. And this one's quite recent, it's from end of March. So we see that already startups have cut on their risk, and they've laid off a lot of people. Unfortunately, the statistic is currently available only for the United States, but it can help us have an idea about what's happening throughout the world. Just realize that in San Francisco, out of the blue, there's been 2,500 people that lost their jobs, and these are startup people that were affording to pay the high rents in Silicon Valley, which means they had high salaries. So this will impact on their life, because most likely they will move out of there, they will go somewhere else, but they will keep the knowledge they have, the attitude they have, so they will be able to put their skill to work there and continue innovating and maybe doing a project of their own. So this, we can also see a good side to this, and as said, it gives us an idea about what's happening in our cities as well. Just to wrap up about the relationship between investment and startups. Venture capitals will not stop investing because they cannot afford to do it. They would go bankrupt if they will stop investing. They have to do it. It's part of their business model, and most of the VCs just started their businesses recently, and the lifetime of a VC is 5, 6 to 7 years. But they will not invest out of this fear of missing out. They will have more deeper approach. They will become more selective, and that translates into two possible scenarios, which is that there will be no interim rounds, so no middle rounds of investment in pre-seed or seed stage startups, because the risk will be too high. So they will expect startups to prove that the technologies work, that there is clients, and these startups will most likely have a constant burn rate, which means that they will have running costs that will eat their initial investments away. And once the sales fall, they will be massively affected. The other thing that will happen is once there will be investment rounds on the market, the valuation will be lower, which means that a startup which has a good market traction will not be valued maybe at 1 million euro this time around. It will be valued at half the value, which means that
currently there is a research that I was reading. I see that the valuation dropped almost to 1/3 of the actual value, so it's less than half. We have to be aware of this case.
Yes, and it is because these days the ones holding the money, holding the financial resources, will have a bigger strength than the ones holding volatile markets, volatile consumer or B2B markets. So basically, the negotiation power of the investment funds will be bigger, and they will ask for bigger equity in the companies they will invest. So these are things that will happen.
But what I understand, then the process will be faster than in such a case. Your expectation is you will have less round, but a faster investment process.
Yeah, I expect it to happen faster. It also calls for means of alternate funding. I don't think that crowdfunding will be as popular anymore because people will not risk their economies or their financial resources to commit to a product that might come on the market later on, because they will want to make sure of their life this month, next month, and so on. But I think here is where governments can come in and innovate. And the European Commission, with whom I work in the past years, has been innovating on ways to finance startups and innovation. And they've been setting up blended finance schemes, which mix grants with VC investment. And they are very promising. So I think this kind of alternate funding, where you have the state come in and put state resources, invest those resources, or provide grants to support the value of death. To support the value of death of the startups' evolution. That's what we need to have in the upcoming years, and it's much better than putting loans out there.
I'm really thankful and grateful for this really futuristic approach, because I believe it would help us to direct the process and these days. And you are already in that business, as you mentioned. You are working on that very actively. I'm sure that the participants benefit a lot, and from the sharing that I see here, I'm hearing that the startups has a major responsibility with the innovation. They have to focus on specific areas that we mentioned here. And still the resources are there, but we have to be aware about the current status. As you mentioned, that the valuation case, the resources, the tools that we have is different. With that bear in mind, we will have more chance to move forward. Ionut, I will turn to you for your final remarks, and then we will close our session.
On one of the slides, I wrote that we need innovation instead of isolation. So now we are isolated, but this doesn't have to be the landmark of our lives in 2020. I think the landmark of this year should be that each of us should innovate, should think about what we can do different once we get out of our houses and into our businesses. How we can improve what we were doing, how we can improve what we were doing for our clients and improve their work and their existence, and how we can improve things in our communities, because these times they bring out the bad, the worst and the best in people. And I think by having this powerful contrast, we can again see what's white and what's black, what's good and what's bad. And as it happened in all the movies we watched when we were kids, we always want to be the good guys. So it's an opportunity to be the good guys in these times. And it's an opportunity to rethink what we were doing before and think how we can do it better, or think if we should be doing something different. There are businesses which will die, and we have seen that the strongest impact has been on tourism, on restaurants, and obviously it's on tourism and restaurants if they don't know how to adapt. But if they will learn how to adapt, and for that they can either have the ideas in their heads as they stay at home, or they can buy or rent ideas from people who generate ideas, from startups, from innovators. So no matter what your field of work is, you will be forced to innovate, but by what's going on. You can do it by your own, or you can work with people that can do it with you, So I think there's a good opportunity to improve on our life and our work in the years to come.
So Radostina Peteva had a question about which business do you think will die after pandemic. So you mentioned the tourism specifically, but also the businesses that does not have the capability to adapt. If we are not able to adapt, any business, any sector may have challenge in that.
The usual suspects to die by coronavirus, and I'm talking about business and not people, are in tourism, in horeca, so hotels, restaurants, and cafes. So these consumer markets which have people or which presume that people go out and visit places and so on, but they will be able to be alive if they will be able to innovate and change what they do, because the need of the people will still be there. They will need to do these things, but they will do it in a different way. So I think this will accelerate a very conservative market where things have been done in the same way for 50, 60 years now, and where innovation has been really, really slow. Now it will accelerate, because once somebody does it, everybody else will do it. But for now, in the upcoming 2 years, I think the impact will be huge on this business.
Thank you, Ionut, for also addressing this question. I thank you for all the experience that you shared. That was very valuable. So we have the chance to share this moment, this hour, through our webinar with our participants. I thank to participants also for their contribution. They shared their time as well, and they contributed with their questions. We always invite to our Gain Global platform. It's also an opportunity, open platform where you can continue the discussion. We will be really glad nowadays to hear new ways of innovation, new ways how you overcome this challenge. Also, what's going on in your ecosystem, please feel free to share. We will be glad also to welcome you for any experience that you wish also to share in the webinar. This open invitation for all participants. Yeah, it was a pleasure to welcome you here. I thank you for your time. Please
thank you for inviting.
Keep safe and healthy. I know you are very busy. Keep doing great things in the innovation part, and we hope we see each other soon, somewhere around the world.
Until next time.
Until next time. See you. Please take care. Bye.